crop just like any other crop. You have to get to a different ethos. Even if you're doing boutique gardening, inefficiency and low yields won't be rewarded the way that they were in the old economic system. Basically, if you want to be a lazy gardener, it's not going to work now. So the little clip that I showed you is the first step towards industrialization. I mean, it's hard to believe that in the 30 or 40 years that people have been growing marijuana and growing big plants, that they've been taking them down by hand. And no one ever, to my knowledge, no one ever thought, hey, I'm going to bring in some power tools and make this a more efficient operation. And as soon as you saw this video, you probably recognized, hey, how crazy is it for me to go out with a clipper and clip big plants when I can do this and take down a plant in a few minutes? The whole, everything that I'm going to be showing you now is dealing with that, is dealing with this change so that your yield per unit of labor gets way increased. Okay, do I have a clicker? Is it up here? Oh, okay. So I'm going to show you, these are some, this was, believe it or not, this was a little profitable garden that somebody had. And it shows you what, I just wanted to show you what we're coming out of. This was a garden, a wick garden that somebody had. Other small gardens, people would have started with 1 or 2 lights, then it grew to 10 lights and to units like this. This is about perhaps 60 feet long. It's about 12 or 14 feet wide. And these were considered big economic units at one time. Now, I took this picture in India when it was still legal in India. It was, this was in 1981. And this was a field in Kandwar, India. And you can see even here that the plants are grown much closer together than they were grown in the prohibition economic model. And the reason for that is in the prohibition economic model, there's a plant count. And so if you can only grow a limited number of plants, the idea is to grow the biggest plants. But that's a little different than what a farmer says. If you ask a farmer, well, how much corn are you growing? He doesn't say, well, I'm growing 40,000 pieces per, he doesn't say I'm growing 40,000 pieces per acre. He's saying what his yield is. And so he's not necessarily trying to optimize the yield per plant, but per area. And that's what I saw in this picture here in India. It was made illegal later in the decade there. This is a picture that I took in Switzerland. Now, it's very interesting. You see those houses right there? There's no theft in Switzerland. They say, somebody asked me, how many cops do you think there are in Switzerland? And he said, and I said, I don't know. He said, Well, 3 million, half the Swiss are watching the other half. And here, these plants were planted at 1 plant per square foot. And so the yield gets much higher because each plant only has to grow a little bit. And you can see that the buds, each plant has a top bud, and those buds leave behind the vegetation below. And this is more what a field should look like than most of the fields that you've probably seen. This was also taken in Switzerland, and they were just using black plastic. I would use white black plastic to do light deprivation, but you notice that the plants are pretty small, and so the row covers were only about 4.5 feet high or so, and the plants were planted 1 per square foot, and immediately put in, or within a week or two, put into flowering. So we would get 2 to 3 crops a year there. And each one of these rows is about 200 feet long, and it takes about 10 minutes for 2 people, one at either end, to either put the covers on or take them off. And you know, a lot of people here are thinking about doing greenhouses or doing tunnels. This is the cheapest thing that you can do, and you could get perhaps 2 crops a year here if you did it like this. And that would be considerably less than you get in a greenhouse, but then you don't have the cost of the greenhouse. There's a picture taken in Morocco just this June, and I want you to notice how short the plants are, for one thing. Notice the plants, they're like 2 or 3 feet. Now, this was taken in Katama in Morocco. And Katama is this province that is populated by Berbers, who are an indigenous people, and they've been in the Rif Mountains for perhaps thousands of years. And they're semi-autonomous. Now, the hotel that I was staying in, let's see, it's, you see the red brick building on our right? That is the beginning of the hotel in Katama. So I had to cross from the main street there, over a bridge, to get to these gardens. Certainly not a large hike to get to see some marijuana there. And in Katama, they only grow, the only crop that's grown in this area is cannabis. It's grown in the mountains. You can see there's terraced area up on the upper right there. There's a terraced area with green, and that contains cannabis. And it's the only crop grown there. And if you go across the border to the next province, there's no cannabis grown. It's olives and grapes and figs, other regular crops, and this is the only area where it's freely grown in Morocco. Now, the main thing that I want to show you about this is how close together the plants are grown. There are perhaps 3 plants per square foot, and because even during this June 22nd, it only gets about 14 hours of daylight, the plants quickly go into flowering. I was there in late June, and in mid-July, and the plants were already the males were already in mid-flowering, and the females were beginning to flower. And what happens is that the males flower and then they die. The females do get pollinated, and they do produce seeds, and so they make the hash out of seeded buds. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the seeds don't go into the hash, and but they grow far too much to sex the plants. There's no way that they would ever be able to sex the plants, and they haven't developed all-female seed. I think it would be too much seed for that. This is another example. These plants were well watered and well fertilized. Each farmer has their own technique, and you can see the differences in the plants. When I first went there 30 years ago, I couldn't get high off the hash. It was too weak for me. And when I went into a tea shop up in the mountains, and I lit up a joint that I brought in from Amsterdam, everybody crowded around me and wanted a hit, wanted seeds. And this time when I went, the pot everything had improved incredibly, because the indigenous weed had been crossed with weed with seeds from European varieties that European buyers had brought, so that the entire genome of the genome of the entire grass-growing region has changed. Now up here, if you look on the upper left, between the two trees, you'll see stuff on that mountainside. That's all grass. Now, this is a garden that I'm growing right now, and actually it's going to be harvested in November, for around 2nd of November, 1st of November. And this is being grown in Oakland, California. And first of all, I like growing outdoors in cities, and I'll tell you why. So you're out in I was talking with somebody, and she said to me that they had experienced a big robbery, and the robbers were violent, pulled up with a semi-van, and filled it up with the produce and left, leaving the growers tied up. This was out in the country, right? So you're out in the country, and there's some violent people coming, and you call the police. So will they show up in a half hour? Is that enough? You know, is that enough time for the robbers to leave? Here in the city, the cops are there. You know, it's Oakland, California. There's a robbery in place, those cops are there. So, so I actually think that urban outdoor farming is much safer than outdoor farming in the country. And here in Detroit, I mean, do you have any open space here where you could do any farming?
But we also have a lot of people who areas that aren't policed in those open spaces too. So the police
Well, wait a second. If there were valuables there, the police would be there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not going to take this argument. In an urban area, the cops are there. In violence. Okay, we're all in agreement. Let me continue. Now, these plants were planted July 29th. So we had this problem, and that is that you know, the plants had a limited time that they could grow vegetatively. So this was an acre. It's filled with 2,800 plants in 20-gallon containers, and the plants were transplanted between July 15th and July 29th. This is what they look like about 15 days ago. As I said, they'll be harvested around November 1st. And, you know, you can go home at night and feel pretty safe because, okay, there's a guard there and some things, but the big thing is that the cops could be there very quickly. And that's the beauty of urban gardening. And also, it's only 15 minutes from my house. Makes it very convenient. This is another picture of that. See, we had neat little rows. The plants are almost two-dimensional. In that, you know, they're trellised the way sort of the way grapes are. And so, all the advantage of that is that all of the buds get the same amount of light. So the entire plant comes in at the same time. Now I wanted to show you another technique. So, you know, this is about industrialization. And so what I've been trying to show you in this is orderly ways of planting massive amounts of plants. And so if we went back to Morocco, and let's say those pictures that I showed of Morocco, and we wanted a harvest, let's say we had farmland and we were growing very close together. You could just use a combine to harvest. So there would be no, this is for extracts, there would be no people. And then I showed if you're growing large plants for some reason, or plants of a larger size, how you can use power tools rather than hand clippers and things like that. So that's the theme of this. So what this is, here's a picture. So this is the end picture here. That's what we're going to get to. Okay. So what are these things doing? Well, first of all, they're wick systems. And so with a wick system, you don't water the plants, you water the reservoir. You keep the reservoir filled, and then the wicks pick up the water the top of the plant. So the advantage of this is that if you put attach all of these to a reservoir above the level of the plant, above the level of the garden, maybe let's say you're on a flat area or platform, and then by gravity, if you use flush valves, you know, that keep the water at a certain height, you can keep your plants watered automatically without any electrical things or anything like that, and actually leave as long as your reservoirs stay filled. So here they are putting them together, and this is what, and the end, we saw the end first. I know it will work. There it is. Okay, so here's what's happened. First, you have the bottom tray, kiddie pool or tray, or you could actually have a hole and have the hole lined, and then there's something to raise the level of the second container. We use shipping pallets, and then we put in the second tray. You don't actually need the tray, you could just use the bags. The bags have wicks in them made from nylon rope that goes along the bottom of the bag and then trails down to catch the water. The water comes up through capillary action and comes up all through the soil so that the plants don't have to be watered. The white on the top protects the water from, it's white-black plastic, and it protects the water from light so that you don't get algae in the water, and it also reflects light when the plants are small, and it stops transpiration so that there's little water lost. And this cuts down water use, since no water is going out of any of the systems, cuts down water use by 1/2, 1/3 to 2/3, but let's say 1/2. So that's 1/2 the water used, 1/2 the fertilizer, maybe less fertilizer than that. So I think that's a pretty efficient system. Now, this is the newest stage in industrialization. It's LED lights. And up until just a couple of years ago, LED lights, just did not produce the power to produce, did not produce enough energy to give the plants really big buds, but that's changed now. So that's cutting down the cost per gram, cutting down the cost of producing a gram by half the electricity. Now, the reason that I'm showing this is this was a garden in, not a garden, but a farm, an indoor farm in Colorado. Everything here is being done by hand. The containers were filled by hand. The plants were transplanted by hand. Any manicuring or pruning was done by hand. The watering was automatic, but it was as if we were in pre-industrial country. This is what they got out of it. Here they are moving stuff along. What would happen is the individual would cut down one plant, carry it out of the room, hang it up, go back, cut the next plant, walk outside the room to put it on the hanger. Another person put it on the hanger and secured it, and that went back and forth. Well, could they have brought that hanger and tray into the room? Could they have cut several plants and then done stuff? Why are they growing plants so large? So here was this big factory that was making money, but it was making money even with its inefficiency because the cost of marijuana was high. Now, as the cost of marijuana goes down, should I tell you how low the cost of marijuana is? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. In 1974, a pound of Colombian marijuana went for about $500. Now, that had, I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt when I say it had 9% THC. So a friend of mine came down. I don't usually buy marijuana. Even today, I've been given some gifts. I'm always gifted with marijuana. Very fortunate. Actually, I'll take a digression from what I was saying to mention that I realize now that I made a major mistake in life when I started writing about marijuana rather than either gold or sex. Based on my experience with marijuana. So, going back to 1974, when a pound of marijuana with 9% THC in the pound went for $500. So this friend of mine came down from Oregon last year, and very illegally he crossed the border into California with marijuana. Come on, everybody. Come on, I want to hear it. Come on. Yeah. So bad. And he was selling the pound for $500. And it was like 18%. So in other words, that pound of Colombian brought up to the same percentage would have been $1,000. Now, so that $1,000 would have, in current dollars, would have been about 3 times, about 4.5 times what it cost, what the dollar was worth in 1974. So that brings the price up to $4,500, right? So we take that 4,500, the 500 over the 4,500, and it's 1/9. So the cost of of a gram, in constant dollars, the cost of a gram of THC has gone down to 1/9 of the price that it was in 1974. And it's been constantly been going down. It hit a peak of 4,000 like in the 90s, and it's been going down since that time. So this factory won't last unless it changes. See those big plants? So I want you to think about light for a second. So light comes down from wherever, from the sun or from electric system, and as soon as it hits an object, the light's over. There's no more light. So when you hear it penetrates deeply, it penetrates as deep as the first object that it hits, right? It doesn't go through the leaves, it just goes to the leaves. So if you look at a tree outside, there's only one layer of light hitting that tree. There aren't a lot of leaves under the canopy because the canopy leaves catch the light and it doesn't go any further. Why should there be any other vegetation? So all this vegetation that's on the bottom there that isn't producing bud, all of that material might as well not have been grown. So why are they growing big plants? So let's take a given area. Let's say we have a 4x4 area. Now you know that we could train a single plant to cover that area, and it would take a month or 2 to train the plant to cover that 4x4 area, or we could take 16 plants and get the same canopy, and we don't have to spend all that time and all that extraneous work for the plant developing material that will never be, that isn't produce. So if you have so think about how much time it takes for that one plant to grow vegetatively before it flowers, and think of how much time it takes 16 plants in the same space to fill that space. So this is so inefficient that it can't last once efficiency comes in, because the cost of marijuana is still going down. Much more efficient. Now you can see there were 2 different methods used here. What happened was one grower was fired and another grower came in. Which grower would you rather have, 1 or 2? Which is which? Well, what do you think? Well, let's just do Socratic reasoning. Okay, so so one group of plants has to be older than the other, right? Yes, right? Yes. And which group is it? It's a group in the back, right? Who do you think did that one? The one that got fired. He got it. Okay, we continue. So you see the new employee doesn't get, let's see, he never gets sick. Sometimes he needs a little oil, but never gets, never has an emergency and has to leave, has never been accused of any kind of theft. Like, I've been going through Michigan's background check. This guy passed it. And basically, think of a Roomba that carries plants and that you can program. Take this whole group of plants from one place to the next place. Potting machines. Now, I'm just showing you the simplest of potting machines, but there are all kinds of potting machines. This isn't actually a potting machine. What this does is it's a pot filling machine. There's another much more expensive machine that you could buy that will place the plant in the pot. These come, you see this is a portable model. Somebody could just buy one of these machines and go from grower to grower when they need potting and just fill their pots for them. Now, you know that, so anytime that you have people filling a pot, at some point, you're going to either have an OSHA violation, or somebody's going to get hurt, or somebody's going to get carpal tunnel syndrome, or their backs are going to go out. And the craziest thing that I saw this year was they were filling 3,000 pots, and they were doing it from this big pile of dirt. And I said, well, why didn't you put the material on a platform so you could shovel it down? And they went, why would I do that? That's what they do. Okay, this shows a more automated thing. So, like, as I said, the cost of a machine to place the plants is very expensive. So if you can just fill the pots, you take away the most tedious work and leave only the work that takes finger function and some skill, a little bit of skill to do. So this just speeds it up because people don't have to deal with the pot filling. Here is what these machines are doing. This is an optical scanner, and each one of they're transplanting. These are seedlings, and they're transplanting the seedlings, and they're going to a larger container. And each seedling is analyzed optically, and then it's placed in one of 3 different trays, different size containers, and then the runts they're just left in the trays to be disposed of. But so let me give you an example. You go to the store this Christmas, and you see all these poinsettia plants, and they're all in containers that are in trays. And you pick up that container. You will be the first person touching that container, because the plant will be planted automatically, transplanted automatically, placed in the container. When it comes time for packing, the container is automatically moved into the trays. The trays are put into piles that are put on pallets and shipped out. Not a person touching anything. And that is the route that marijuana is going to go. Isn't that cute? Look how cuddly it is. So here, what's happening is that all these trays are being laid down. And this, the machine that's doing it doesn't have a driver or anything. It's automated as well. A little planter, transplanter. Isn't that cute? So, see, I'm really into, as you might have noticed, I'm really into small plants. And so something like this can plant major acreage. A bigger machine, this one's for a greenhouse, but it can plant major acreage as compared with how am I going to transplant plants to 20 acres. Well, this is how it's done. So I guess that's all I have on this. But what I wanted to say is that the body of knowledge that's required in order to do this is a different body of knowledge than most growers have had the ability, not the ability, but they haven't had the circumstances to acquire that body of knowledge. So that means that more and more we're going to have to look towards agriculture and the people coming out of agriculture rather than out of the subculture. And that, you know that that's already happening. And on the other hand, you know that there have been some major disasters, even recently in corporate marijuana culture, where whole crops that might have been worth $40, $50 million have just gone up as waste, both in Canada and in the United States. And that's because people weren't familiar with the subculture and with the knowledge that the subculture brought to cannabis cultivation. So it has to be a melding of the two of those, sort of a foot in each door. And processors, growers that don't do this, that don't have some sort of new, that don't use labor-saving techniques, they're going to be left behind. And I know there's going to be somebody in here who says, oh, but I grow boutique marijuana, and my marijuana is so boutique, and I love it so much, and I take care of it every day, and I treat it so nicely, and I give it milk at night, and some cookie crumbs, and whatever. Well, look, I showed you those fields, and that marijuana didn't get any special attention. It didn't get cuddled at night or anything. And I don't know that it knew how much it was loved or anything like that. And then I realized, wait a second, marijuana's been growing for millions of years without humans. Maybe this whole idea of this boutique thing, maybe the plant really responds mechanistically to what happens to it. So that in this circumstance, it's programmed to do one thing. In another circumstance, it's programmed to do another thing. So that we want to draw out its potential by finding out what its needs and requirements are, rather than how we can boutique it. And the reason why I say that, remember we talked about that poinsettia that you would pick up? Have you ever noticed, it's perfectly shaped, it looks perfect, however it was grown to to near perfection, along with 7 or 8 other plants that looked just like it. And that was not, I mean, I'm sure that the farmer had love, but it was in a different way. It wasn't expressed daily by petting the plant. And the plant perhaps didn't ever see a human until it got into that store. So we should really look, we shouldn't be sentimental about this. We should really look at what the plant requires and how to meet the plant's needs as efficiently as possible. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to earn a living cultivating marijuana. Thank you. And I'm open to questions. Yes?
Well, the picture that you had outside, were your plants more susceptible to the disease and probably mice, spiders, different things like that? The ones that you showed us.
Well, yes, but one thing is that the faster you get the plant in and out of the ground, the less susceptible it is. Yeah. And as you're growing a monocrop, and so as you're growing this plant year after year, certainly insects and pests and diseases are going to build up, and you're going to have to deal with them. But there are biological ways of dealing with it, and that's going to become more apparent in the next few years. Yes? Any other? Go ahead. Yes?
No. What would advice would you give to people who just want to start out today to be cultivators?
One piece of advice. Don't do more, don't limit the amount that you start with so that you get it right, rather than having to deal with like a quantity that you can't possibly care for. So don't overdo it. Yes?
Any comments on outdoor growing here in Michigan?
Yeah, you could, well, what I would do is start with either seedlings or clones, and I think that you could get 2 crops. I think you could start out in late May, especially if you had row covers on it, like clear plastic to hold the heat in, and then those would be ready in late July, and then you could plant your second group of plants, and you wouldn't have to. The first group you would have to do light deprivation, but you wouldn't have to do that on the second group. Yes? You had a question? Yes?
What about strains, different strains? Are they more conducive to indoor, outdoor, that whole aspect of it?
Yeah, you want to get a strain that you know will do well under the circumstances that you're growing it. Yes?
In today's age, do you think that technology or automation of the process is more important?
They, in essence, they are one and the same. When you get new technology in, the reason you're getting it in is for automation or something like that.
Do you still think there's a lot of room for improvement there?
Well, agriculturally, the equipment is there. Adapting it for marijuana is the next step, and really getting acceptance by the farmers, because so a lot of these larger operations are inefficient because the farmer started out with 100 plants, and so when the new operation came in, he just did, he just rubber stamped 100 plant. He would, like, I've seen any number of places where there was this beautiful open area, maybe greenhouse area, and then it's getting divided up into rooms and sections and bays. And there was one place where I didn't get hired where they had already put it in and I was doing the final inspection, so to speak. And I had never seen the place or been involved in it, and they said, what should we do next? And I said, well, tear this stuff out now that you put it in. Now you can tear it out. And so you would have an open space and you can have economies of scale and bring in machinery. And, you know, I don't know what happened to them. So also, one other suggestion that I have is that people think outside the box, and just because nobody's doing it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And the way that I would do it is do it on a really small scale, on a really experimental scale, perhaps under 100 square feet, and then you can always scale it up if it works. On a small scale, as long as you're giving the plants the same environment that they're getting on the small scale, on a large scale, they'll react in the same way. Yes?
You was talking about LED lights. Would now, with the way the technology, like the gentleman was speaking earlier, would you now go with LED lights versus the old school, the old way of lighting was?
I definitely go with LEDs, except for one thing, that they're so costly that if you don't have loans to do it, it may hinder the amount of space that you could do. So if you can get, especially if you can get loans for them, they pay off really quickly. Yes?
With efficient input and final product in mind, where do you stand between the inexpensive, sterile, salt-based programs versus like organic food soil, indoor specifically?
So, you know, especially if you're growing for extract, I don't see where the method of cultivation, barring any serious chemistry, pesticidal chemistry, I don't see where it would make much of a difference if you're growing for extraction. And you know, I know everybody's, like, to me, when you talk about organic, the primary thing is dealing with farming and actually saving the soil. But when you grow indoors, I don't know that, or when you're growing outside of the soil or in a planting medium or something like that, I don't know that organic necessarily has to be the best way to grow. And I'll just say one little thing about it, not exactly about cannabis, but I got this job for a greenhouse company because I was growing tomatoes using a wick system, which is a hydroponic system, you know, that wick system that I showed you, outdoors. And the representative from the greenhouse company picked a tomato from my vines that were growing outdoors in January, which got me this job. And those tomatoes had never seen they hadn't been fertilized with organic fertilizer. They'd been fertilized with hydro mixes. And you know, those tomatoes, and I grew tomatoes again this year hydroponically, and those tomatoes are great. And you know what, I think that if marijuana is grown properly hydroponically, you'd be hard put to be able to tell the difference between hydro and organic. I think that the big thing about organic is preserving the soil so that it can produce. But if you're just reproducing that artificially, you might be costing more to the environment than if you're using mineral fertilizers. So, you know, you're growing organically. Are they digging up a bat cave and killing the bats while they get you your bat guano? I mean, are you using peat moss so that the tearing up the bogs of Canada to get you your peat moss that you use once before it's thrown into a dump? So I think hydro is a lot more, can offer in certain circumstances, especially indoor growing, a lot more to society than some organics. It's not cut and dry. One more thing. You realize that this is the reddest agricultural product right now that there is. Growing buds under lights. Think about that, how red that is. Okay, any other questions? Yes? I'm not going to talk about whether you're certified or not. I'm going to talk about whether you're knowledgeable or not. So if education and knowledge are the cheapest ways for success. So don't do your setup and then take the class. You know, today, like, 3 people said to me, well, I'm going to set up this greenhouse and then I'll call you and you can inspect it. And I said, so let's say you do the greenhouse and I inspect it and I say, tear this out and tear that out, right? No, get your knowledge before get the knowledge before you start. I mean, if you want to grow some plants while you're getting that knowledge, that's really good. But don't put any major investment in before you know what you're doing. Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, just a personal question. What is your go-to strain? What is your...
There's a strain, well, you know, before I was arrested by the federal government, even though I was an officer of the city of Oakland, I had a nursery and I had this strain J27, which I popularized for a while. And right now it's a proprietary strain of just 2 or 3 people, but I really like that strain. It's antidepressant, great for parties, social, and yet it's not disassociative. So, but you know, I love OG, and I'll tell you what OG stands for: other guys. So, well, thank you very much.